My name is Sally Cullimore and I'm the Policy Manager here at the HTA. So just to give you a bit of background on the legislation, this presentation and the interpretation of the new regulations via our guidance that we've released was produced by the HTA through communicating extensively with DEFRA's implementation team for these regulations. Also from taking part in a variety of meetings attended by industry, which were also often led by DEFRA, and from questions and visits with a variety of HTA members from all sectors. I'll take you through the basics, through to some more detailed interpretations of the new regulations, and lastly explain what the HTA is going to do to help. It's worth stating now that at this time, government and the civil service are not engaging with stakeholders, which is standard practice before a general election in a process known as PERDA, probably a word that you've come across recently. This means that any questions that I can't answer today that need referring back to DEFRA may have to remain unanswered until the general election period is over. I know that is the 14th and the 12th are very close together, but unfortunately this is something we have no control over. This also may include receiving advice from your local plant health inspector on interpretation of the regulations, because they too are technically not allowed to engage in policy decisions because they're an agency of DEFRA. So HTA advice to you is to show that to your plant health inspector that you intend to comply with the regulation, even if you may not actually be ready to implement it as of the 14th of December. If you're on the webinar, please feel free to submit questions as we go, and we'll look at them in turn with questions from the floor at the end of the presentation. So just to briefly give you an overview of what we'll cover the overarching legislation and the reasons behind it, the definitions of some terms, when and how to plant passports along with design guidance, what actions the HTA is taking and has taken, and I'll also provide you with some further contacts for advice and guidance, and then we'll have our Q&A session. So, what are these rules, these SRF rules? It's smarter rules for safer food, and they come under the EU-wide legislation, and I'll explain some reasons about why it comes under food shortly. And we must be clear, these regulations received European Council approval in 2016, and on the 14th of December 2019, that's the date they become applicable, apart from one exception. So although affected by Brexit, they are not Brexit specific. So now we're in an extension period, they will be assimilated into UK law in full. So there'll be no delay of the implementation of the legislation. So if we exit the EU, then there will be adjustments to these regulations, but that will require further UK legislation to be passed to enable that to happen. So we're looking at an extended period of time where these laws are 100% applicable. DEFRA have also stated categorically that the principles of the regulations will be adhered to 100%, and it's just the finer detail that may then be amended. So these regulations will be law on the 14th of December this year and will remain so for the foreseeable future. So why is SRSF relevant? It's a set of 3 EU regulations for the protection against animal and plant pests and diseases, and it will affect individuals and businesses involved in the agri-food chain, so that includes horticulture. The first regulation is the Official Controls Regulation. So this dictates how animal and plant health controls will be monitored and enforced by the member state authorities. This applies from the 14th of December this year, and it's a law for ensuring that persons and authorities enforce the rules, and government must verify that businesses are complying with legal requirements. It includes what action enforcement authorities must take when they spot non-compliance. The one that's relevant to our industry and our individual businesses is the Plant Health Regulation. This is controls for protecting plants from diseases and pests, and it supersedes all previous health laws. And this applies from the 14th of December 2019. And plant passporting is just one part of this legislation. The third is the Animal Health Regulation, which comes in 2021. So the Plant Health Regulations. Each regulation has its own implementing legislation, which fills in the detail. So, for example, in 2017, legislation was released on the design of plant passports. 2019, a high-risk host list was released. And it's due to the globalised trade and the threat of climate change, which now present a greater risk to the ornamental plant sector, that these regs are designed to integrate the principle of biosecurity throughout the EU. The new regulation sets out controls and restrictions that will apply to imports into the EU and internal movements of certain plants, plant pests and other materials to help reduce these risks. So the important keyword there is internal movement, so that includes within the UK. And the principles include harmonised traceability across the EU, and that's achieved through enhanced plant passporting requirements, which extend the scope and change the format of plant passporting, and also new requirements for the authorisation to issue plant passports. New requirements for the registration of professional operators within the industry. These requirements will be introduced by 14th of December 2020. However, the regulation still states you must be authorised to issue plant passports by the 14th of December this year. So then the strengthening of protected zones within the EU and pest-free, and with new restrictions on movements between disease and pest-free areas. And more goods imported into the EU will require a phytosanitary certificate. In fact, I think that's everything. I think there's a handful of fruit that are accepted, but everything must have a phytosanitary. There'll be new requirements applying to high-risk plants and regulated non-quarantine pests. And there'll be a new category of priority pests, including annual surveying requirements and outbreak contingency planning. So we can expect a whole raft of new regulations that have both already come in and will come in the future that fill in those details. And importantly, also looking at trade flows. So there'll be a precautionary approach to new trade flows coming into the EU, and there's a commitment to undertake thorough pest risk assessments before allowing new trade flows into the EU. So what we're really here to talk about is plant passporting. So I may refer to them as PP or PPs, plant passports, but the key principle behind the new plant passport regulations is that they will provide both traceability and assurance within one document. So this means that when a plant passport is issued or passed on, the professional operator involved is providing the next stage in the supply chain with the assurance that they are competent and the plants have been checked, in particular for harmful pests and diseases. It's also worth noting that provision is made in the current legislation for further implementing legislation to introduce an electronic plant passport. This is not in development currently, but you can be assured that HTA will be at the table and represent members' interests as and when this occurs. So we're looking at a harmonised traceability system that provides visible assurance of competency, and its aim is to make documentation more transparent, recognisable and consistent across the EU and also internally within the UK. So the key points of the regulation. All businesses professionally involved with plants and plant products will be required to register with their relevant plant health authority. So that's everybody. This will eventually become a register of professional operators, or POs, and I'll show you a little bit more information about that later. And also for today, when I refer to APHA, the Animal and Plant Health Agency, I'm sort of referring to the devolved nations inspectorates as well. So, for example, the Horticulture Marketing Unit in Scotland, but I might say the words APHA, I mean the Competent Plant Health Authority. So the purpose of a plant passport, it will be a conformity label that provides that assurance that the plant or product referred to has received the proper checks during its time with you and has been inspected at point of dispatch by you, the business selling it. Therefore, it provides assurance to the next stage in the supply chain that you, the business selling or moving it, is professionally competent and the plants have received the relevant checks before being moved. It's a fundamental requirement of the legislation. I make no apologies for repeating myself. It's real fundamental principles. Also, plant passports are issued by the business selling the plants and products, and that business is authorised by APHA to do so. It's not a phytosanitary certificate. The phytosanitary certificate is issued by APHA or the relevant plant health authority in that particular country when plants cross the EU border. For example, APHA will issue a phytosanitary to a business if they're exporting a batch of plants, for example, to China, and vice versa. So you, the business or professional operator, you issue your own plant passport if necessary, and the plant health authority issues the phyto. To ensure full traceability from producer to end user, then all plants for planting and also some plant products must travel with a plant passport issued in the form of a label. There is also the requirement for the business trading the plants to provide full traceability. So you must know what comes into your business, what happens when it's with you, and when it leaves your business, where it goes to. So all plants for planting must be passported. So what does that actually mean? So it's defined as living plants intended to remain planted, to be planted, or to be replanted. There's actually a longer definition of the regulations. You're welcome to look it up if you require, but that's what we're working on for now. So some examples might be pot plants, bulbs, grubbed up Christmas trees, bare root plants, cuttings, liners, house plants, hedging, large specimens, aquatic plants, the list goes on. Some of the plant products that require plant passports include foliage, which is cut from living specimens over 3 meters in height. So take, for example, you're making a Christmas wreath from foliage. If that's been cut from a tree that's 3 meters or taller, then that wreath requires a plant passport to travel if it's going to another professional operator. Not if it's going to the consumer, but if it's going to the professional operator. Some seed will also need to be plant passported, but growing media is not included. So professional operator, it's a new term, and it's defined as any person involved professionally in and legally responsible for activities concerning plants or plant products. So this could include planting, production, marketing, storing, dispatch, breeding, maintaining, selling, any business. So therefore it includes horticultural businesses, selling and growing being one of them. So the rules for the specific criteria for being a PO will come into force on the 14th of December 2020 and are being devised by DEFRA over the next few months. So you can expect more announcements on that. A professional operator may also issue a plant passport, but it is not a requirement. However, in the meantime, you must make yourself known to Plant Health before the 14th of December this year, if you haven't already done so, as you may be required to issue plant passports, and you'll also come under the regulations, and they'll need to know who you are for inspection purposes. So as a grower or a producer, what are your obligations? You must definitely must ensure you are demonstrating full traceability for all plants that enter and leave your business. That's an overarching principle of the legislation. You must be able to pass plant passporting information on when you receive it to the next stage of the supply chain, or issue a plant passport yourself if you further prepare the plants when you receive them and you sell them on to another. Further preparation is defined as anything that represents a phytosanitary risk, so potting on, for example. Also, making up a mixed basket or a container is also further preparing. So if you're making baskets and selling them to other professional operators, for example, you will need to plant passport those. You must keep records for 3 years of everything that comes in and goes out, and be able to show those to any inspector that visits. If you're an online retailer or a distance seller, or you have an online selling website, you must plant passport every plant down to the end user. So the current regulations, regulations coming into force on the 14th, state that you do not need to pass a plant passport on to a consumer or end user unless you are distance selling. It's really important that you realise issuing a plant passport is not a labelling exercise. It is a labelling exercise, but that's not the reason for it. It involves a physical examination of the plants. Said it before, if plants leave your premises with a plant passport, you're giving that assurance that you've conducted that examination of either individual plants or a representative sample before they're moved off your premises. And if you suspect the presence of pests, quarantine pests, you must notify the Plant Health Authority. So, summary of when to actually plant passport. All plants for planting must carry a plant passport at every stage in the supply chain, apart from to the end user consumer. So you might not be issuing the plant passport, you might be passing the information on for passporting information you've received and sending it out of your business if you're not doing that further preparation, or if you're not breaking trade units down, for example. There are exceptions to the rule. Online retailers, for example, who must plant passport down to the end user, or if the species you're selling is a fire blight host, then you must ensure a plant passport is included. If the plants are passported already and you are selling them on to a professional operator but are not further preparing them, you can just record the plant passport information and ensure that the plant passport remains attached as you have received it. You must always maintain records. So important, again, going to reiterate it, full traceability must be maintained. There's been a bit of discussion about the 10-mile rule. You do not have to plant passports if you're moving plants between premises within your business, unless the location is more than 10 miles away. You must plant passport it. So this is only between premises of the same company, legal entity, not from nursery to customer. So if your customer's 200 yards down the road, you must plant passport it. Even if you don't plant passport those items, you've still got to maintain full traceability. So you still must know that you've moved those plants between locations, even if you haven't issued a plant passport. So it's important to make sure your internal systems are up to date and record everything. So attachment of the PP must be attached to the trade unit. So what's a trade unit? The definition in the regulations states it's the smallest commercial or tradable unit applicable to the marketing stage, which may be the whole or part of a lot. So when I first read that, I just went, what? So looking into it in detail, finding out what a lot is, it's a single homogeneous commodity. So commodity, it's the same thing from the same batch, same origin, grown at the same time in the same place and going to the same place when it leaves you. And the trade unit can be all of that, or it can be a part of it. And the trade unit is the item that you attach your passport to. It can be attached to a box, a bundle, a container, if the contents within are homogeneous. So if you've got the same commodity on pallets or in trays, that's the trade unit, you can attach your plant passport to that. Does it contain mixed commodities? It's not a trade unit. You must passport your individual trade units. So, a tray of plants, all the same, from the same batch, going to the same retailer, that's a trade unit. You can passport that. Many trays of plants, all the same from the same batch, going to the same retailer, that's a lot. It is a lot. It's also defined as a lot. Technically, you can plant passport that. So if you've got a whole Danish that's got the same item on from the same batch going to the same place, technically you can plant passport that. But that's obviously often not the case. Mixed trays going to the same retailer, that's a consignment. So the plant passport should be on the trade unit. So that could be a tray, a pot, a shelf, or whatever. If that trade unit is then broken down and sold on, the plants need to be plant passported on. So this is where you need to think about maybe what your customers require. Who are they selling to? Are they selling to other professional operators? A professional operator could be a landscaper, for example. So he's going to need to have that plant passporting information, and he's going to have to keep his records accordingly. So it's important to realise what your plant passported trade units are going to happen to them. Are you going to upset your customer, for example, by just giving them a whole pallet of item with one plant passport on, and then they're selling it on individually? They will then have to plant passport those items themselves. So the advice is to talk to your customers, talk to your suppliers. How are they planning on plant passporting? How would you like to receive the plant passport? Physical attachment. This is the bit that's caused quite a lot of confusion and consternation within the industry. We already looked at how you define your trade unit. So it's a good idea to work out where your trade units are and which units you will attach your plant passport to. It must be a physical attachment, so a clip or stuck on. It cannot be on accompanying paperwork alone. You can replicate it, or you can give the data on your accompanying paperwork, but it cannot be used just as a plant passport, unless the whole consignment is homogeneous. So if that's one lot of all the same thing, technically you could put it on your paperwork and attach it to your consignment. So you can see on this example here, it's actually on the back of a carry handle that's a tray of plants from the Netherlands. They've not filled in section C, which is the traceability code. They don't need to do that because that's at its final stage of preparation. So that's on sale at a retailer, and that's the information the retailer has received. So where exactly might you put plant passports? So in this example here, we've got two trays of two different varieties. Number one, these plants are prepared for the final user, so you could pre-print the plant passport onto the care card. You could be on the front or the back. You don't need a traceability code, they're in their final state. You could stick the pot, or you could laser print onto each pot. You could also sticker or label the marketing tray because each is made up of several of the same plants in the same batch in the same pot. And if you had all the same plants on the trolley, for example, you could label the trolley. But again, it's worth talking to your customers about it. Who do you actually passport to? So with other organisations, you must ensure that the plants travel with a plant passport. And it's a good idea to provide the other organisation with the information that they need to keep for those 3 years. For example, a landscaper planting into a private garden, and he's buying from you, the retailer. He has no need to pass on the plant passporting information, but he must receive plant passporting information from you, the grower, and he must keep what he's received. A landscaper planting into a commercial location for a company must also pass that information on to that company. They're not a professional operator, but they are a commercial business, and they need to keep their own records. Giving plants away to an organisation, so for a charity, for example, you must pass that information on and keep records. But you don't need to passport to individuals. You're not under any obligation to identify other professional operators who buy off you, unless you already know that they are professional operators. If they have an account with you and they're a professional gardener, for example, you must pass that plant passporting information on, either issuing your own passport or passing on the information you've received if you're not further preparing or breaking down that trade unit. So a bit about the general design. It must be distinct and separate from any other information that might be on a label. So if you've got other information on a label and you want to put a plant passport on it, you need to put a board around it. The size is flexible as long as the text is legible, not with a magnifying glass or with microscope. It has to be legible. There's no technical specification about what font to use or anything like that. And the size is flexible. You can be as big or as small as you like, but it must be a square or a rectangle, either oblong or this way or that way. Horizontal or vertical, that's the word I'm looking for. And it can go on a care card. You can pre-print it as long as you don't need to put a traceability code on, or if you don't have the ability to put that on. So what to include on the plant passport? What do the different elements mean? You need the EU flag, so this can be in colour, it can be black and white, you can have black stars on a white background, white stars on a black background. The words plant passport, technically you don't need it in the top right, it can be in the centre as well. You may need to use the PZ code. You only use a PZ code if it's applicable to the species you are selling. You cannot put PZ on every plant passport that you pre-print. Section A, the botanical name. It's genus and species. Genus is only allowed if the species is not available. This is because of potential plant health risks specific to certain species. With mixed baskets and containers, you can see the information in this picture. If your end trade unit is a mixed container or a hanging basket, then you can list the species on one passport. So say, for example, you're making hanging baskets up to go to a retailer. You must plant passport those as trade units, and you can list species on the one plant passport. This is the only exception to the rule. So it's for a unit which is not able to be broken down further or sold separately. Someone did point out earlier that it does say conifer on this label. That is not correct. It's not the botanical name. So please note that's not compliant in the UK. It's not compliant in the EU, but Section B, your national plant health registration number for being authorised to issue plant passports. For those who are not yet authorised but are known to plant health, you'll have a client ID. Currently, before the professional operator criteria comes in, you can technically use your client ID on that section, so I'm informed. After inspectors will accept that. You must precede it with GB, not UK. I know we're the UK, but due to World Trade Organization rules, that's our country code, so we use GB. Section C, the traceability code. I think this has caused the most consternation and uproar within the industry. You only need, I've said it before, you only need the traceability code if that plant is to go through further preparation. And further preparation is defined as any procedure likely to present a phytosanitary risk. So for a plug plant producer, your plants are not prepared for the final user. They will go through further preparation. You must have a traceability code on it. You as a grower receiving that, you need to record that information, but if you're growing for the end user, you do not need to carry that traceability code on, neither do you need to generate one for yourself. But, and there is a but, there is provision in the legislation for further legislation expanding the requirement for a traceability code to more species. So that's right through the supply chain and also right down through to the final end user. So the message here is be aware your system might need to be able to cope with this introduction in the future. So what actually is a traceability code? It's a unique batch code. It's applicable only to that particular plant or batch of plants being dispatched on that day. So e.g. a week number, or it can be supplemented with a barcode or a QR code, but it cannot replace the traceability code. So it should be applied at point of dispatch or at a point where the plant will not be changed in any way. Country of origin. So this has probably caused the most discussion, I would say, in industry. I have asked for a definition of country of origin from DEFRA, officially written down. I am yet to receive that. Apologies, I cannot pass that on, but I've had verbal confirmation that the country of origin is actually the definition that's included in the AFA inspector's operational procedures. So if your AFA inspector has a copy of those operational procedures and can provide you with that in writing, then that's what you can define as country of origin. And it is GB. If it's grown in this country, it's GB. I think, if anybody wants to correct me if I'm wrong, it's generally around the amount of time that it's been grown here. So you can see from this example on the bottom, it's an existing label. The plant passport is on the bottom, has been added into the label, and they've got all the relevant sections. So another example, this is one of the examples that came from the EU legislation. This one's got a PZ on it, at the top by the words plant passport, and at the bottom is provision for a QR code. Again, I say it's only for additional information. So just run through some examples. Again, another DEFRA one here on the left, just showing you that it can be oblong. On the right, very complicated label. Plant passport's been shoehorned in at the top, and it complies with all of them. This label has been approved by DEFRA. So a lot of the labels that have been sent to me, I've sent to the implementation team and asked them if they would be compliant, and they've given me approval for it. So the company involved with this has gone ahead and used this as one of their plant passport labels. Some more examples. Top is a twist tie for a tree climber. That is quite tiny when you see it, but it is actually legible. Printers have got to be very good. And on the bottom, another DEFRA example. So some growers I know are laser printing it onto pots. I saw one the other day at a garden centre, because you can actually do this now. You don't have to wait to the 14th if you want to get going and go ahead. You can start using this system now. Laser printing is quite handy if you want to put a traceability code on something, for example. You can do it there and then. Some are printing onto care cards. Some are finding space on existing labels. Some are even making new labels. It is the principle of traceability behind it that's the important issue to focus on, though. So this particular example, she says clicking too many times. This was not approved. This is for a mixed container. So it was prepared for the end user. So that's why you can have multiple species on it. You don't need to add the cultivar names or the series names or the colour names. You just need the genus and species. The country code is incorrect. It should be GB, not UK. As it's prepared for the end user, you don't need a traceability code. You can put one on if you want to, for your own purposes. It's not a problem. You're not non-compliant if you do. You also don't need to list all the same information at B, C and D. You just simply need the 4 species and genuses at A. So record keeping. So you must keep the records for 3 years. You must keep everything that comes into and out of the business. You can keep them in any form you like, electronically, on paper. They do not have to be facsimiles of the original plant passports. They don't have to be the original plant passports. You just need to be able to contain or keep the data at A, B, C and D on the plant passport. For example, your supplier could email them to you, or they could be on a dispatch note in addition to the physical plant passport. The key thing is to ask your suppliers and talk to your customers. How can they help? How can you help them? Professional operators, a bit more on this one. This must happen now. Registration with Plant Health. It may also be referred to as an authorised operator. This means you can issue plant passports. You may not need to, because you might need to just be recording the information you're receiving and sending it on to the next professional operator. But some of the criteria that might come in on December 2020, you would have to have a person responsible for plant health and for plant passporting within your business. You must have a biosecurity policy, and you must demonstrate knowledge of pests and diseases. There'll be other criteria as well. But there will be a full announcement during 2020, and the HTA will be at the table for input into that. So what's the HTA been doing about all of this? How come we've set ourselves up as the experts, as it were? We've had weekly Q&A sessions and regular meetings with the DEFRA team responsible for implementing the SRSF regulations. We've had additional engagement with ScotGov, with the Scottish Government, to make sure that they're following along with the same criteria as plant health is devolved in Scotland. Our guidelines that we issued have been produced in conjunction with the DEFRA team. They've seen them, they've approved them, so this is their interpretation of the regulations. We've been sending plant passport designs to DEFRA for approval. And we've also written to the Minister responsible for biosecurity and also to the Chief Plant Health Officer. So when we wrote to them, what did we actually ask for? We've asked for a 12-month grace period on penalties for non-compliance to run from the 14th of December this year to the 14th of December 2020. This is not a delay in implementation of the legislation. The legislation will become law on the 14th of December. It's just that the government can't delay the legislation. It's already set in law. It's already been ratified and approved, and it was set that it will become applicable on the 14th. What we've asked for is that the government would be able to tell AFRA inspectors not to issue penalties for non-compliance if you as a business are showing an intent to comply. So we want to work through the detail of what intent to comply is, having a plan, a date for implementation, and an intent on working towards compliance. So unfortunately, due to the general election, we've received a response saying, we've received your request. We have to get legal advice on whether we can advise on policy, because this is a policy matter, and we'll get back to you. I've had my phone on me all day hoping for a response during the day so I could tell you that this is going to be okay, but we haven't had that yet. I know that they are talking about it. They're also talking about the lack of communication between the DEFRA implementation team and the AFA inspectors on the ground. I know there's been a lot of misconceptions and mistruths, and AFA inspectors have sort of had their hands tied a little bit because they've been told because of Brexit they weren't allowed to say anything. But this legislation will be law on the 14th. And that's incontrovertible. It's going to be law. It's about how we become compliant and whether we will get penalties for non-compliance. So, for further contacts, further advice, there's your relevant plant health authorities in the UK if you need to phone anybody or email anybody about it. In summary, make yourself known to Plant Health if you haven't done so already. I'm sure most of you in this room are already known to Plant Health. Register to be authorised to issue plant passports. Ensure you have full traceability systems in place. Decide what your trade units are. Devise your method of printing and attaching the plant passport to the trade unit. Decide how you will keep records of plant passports received and sent. Contact your customers and your suppliers, and keep checking back on our plant passporting pages. So we're going to move to the Q&A session now. So for those of you here at Hort House, Jazz will come over to you with a microphone. Please don't grab it. It's a bit sensitive. Allow it to be held. Are you going to hold it for people, or are you going to allow them to hold it themselves? Okay. For those of you on the webinar, we'll be taking questions in turn. So we'll take a question from the floor first, and then we'll go to the webinar questions. Okay, Jazz first. Anybody got a question?
Just to clarify, in terms of the end user, if we're supplying a retailer, and then they're obviously supplying the customer in the store, where's that? Do you have to have traceability for that then?
So you're supplying a finished plant to a retailer who's then selling it to a consumer?
Yes.
So your obligation is to plant passport to your retailer, to your customer, and the retailer has no obligation to pass that on to the consumer. So the retailer must receive plants that are plant passported and keep those records for 3 years.
No traceability?
Well,
on the code C?
No traceability code at C because you've prepared a plant that's for end use.
Yeah. Okay,
but there is still a requirement for full traceability within your business and also within the retailer's business as well.
Yeah.
Okay. They don't have to know who they're selling to unless a professional operator makes himself known to them at the retail desk. For example, at the till, a landscaper comes in and says, "I'm a landscaper." He's made himself known to that retailer. They have to pass that plant passporting information on. Okay, question on the webinar. If we pot a liner into a larger pot for retailing exclusively through our own retail business, is a new plant passport necessary? If we pot a liner into a larger pot for retailing exclusively through our own business? No, because if they're potting on the site into a larger pot, then no, because they're selling straight for the end user. So they just need to make sure that they keep that plant passporting information that they've received.
But then the person supplying them would have needed to supply a batch code.
Yes, absolutely.
Which they won't have done because they didn't. If they thought it was a liner.
It's a liner, yeah. So if it's an item that requires further preparation, then that supplier will have a traceability code on it. Question from the floor?
Can I ask, what are the penalties for non-compliance?
That's an excellent question. So currently, the penalties for non-compliance could take the form of an inspector stopping all trade into and out of your business, for example. They can put a hold on certain things. They can ask you to destroy certain things if they're not compliant. So it's quite serious if you're stopped from completely trading. There are some discussions going on about new penalties. It says in the legislation, as I said during the first slide, I think it was, on the official controls, governments have to set out what those penalties for non-compliance are and ensure people are sticking to them. So there may be different penalties coming in over the next year, but we wait to see what those are. Currently, I think it's David may know more. Is it a criminal offence? It can actually end up as a criminal offence, can't it?
As far as the regulation's concerned, which is what we're talking about, the new one coming in, it's up to each member state to set down the penalties that they will enforce in their country. And to quote, the penalties must be effective, proportionate and dissuasive. So
dissuasive, not persuasive.
So that could be a fine. It could be. I don't know what DEFRA have set down.
No, I don't know what DEFRA has set down either. So the penalties that are currently enforced will continue on after the 14th, and then there will be maybe more. So is it a question on penalties? Okay. Question from the webinar. So to be clear, I will not need to put the plant passport label onto a plant I am selling to a private individual. The answer is no, you do not. That was an easy one. Okay, Stephen, a minute.
There's a little bit of lack of clarity here in what constitutes trade unit, because we're wholesalers and we buy in trade units have mixed supply on. So there's a rack, say, with daffodils, tulips and hyacinths on, we supply bulbs. Mm-hmm. Now we're buying that as a trade unit and selling it as a trade unit on.
So that's your trading unit. It's not the definition of the trade unit.
Yeah, but what the Dutch have got clarity of them, they're saying that is a trade unit in the Dutch system, and two Dutch suppliers that we deal with are both telling us the same thing. So there's a bit of ambiguity between what we're being told by DEFRA and what the Dutch are doing.
So each member state is allowed to interpret the regulations as
I appreciate that, but then it says we can pass it on and do nothing with it if we're not touching it. So how do we go?
So unfortunately you will have to passport those yourself.
Even though it says we're allowed to pass it on if we don't touch it?
Because the definition of the trade unit is that they have to be different varieties.
Yeah, I understand that.
Okay, so I've asked DEFRA about this. And you are within your rights to contact your supplier and say, in the UK, we have interpreted the legislation in this manner. If you want to supply into the UK, you must be compliant.
Right, so it's for
I
them
understand that's a difficult business question to have.
It's not a difficult question. It might not be answered at one often, but...
Yes. You might not get the answer you want.
Yep.
But I have queried DEFRA about this, and you are within your right to query your supplier.
I would suggest you ask your plant health inspector, because my plant health inspector said he'd be quite happy to have it on the actual delivery note. So I think some of them are going to be a little bit more lenient because they don't know what they are.
Could we be clear about the plant health inspectors? They've had no communication from the DEFRA SRSF implementation team. One of the things we are speaking to DEFRA about is this lack of communication, and the inspectors have unfortunately been allowed to interpret the regulations individually, and you will get differences between areas. So the key thing here is that if you're preparing something in one area and your AFRA inspector's fine with it, bear in mind where your products are going to. They might go into another area and that AFRA inspector is not okay with it. So you're putting your customers at a disadvantage. So we have to interpret the regulations through the implementation team. They're the guys that are setting the regulations, and the AFRA inspectors are the policemen. So at this moment in time, we have to go with what DEFRA are informing us and And what they have informed us is the interpretation. While we've been asking these difficult questions like yours about I'm receiving something in from the Netherlands that's different to what you're telling me, it's a difficult question, but it's how we've been told to interpret it.
Okay. Sorry.
One more.
One more, and then I will probably come back to me later on. When you say label, if they're printed on packaging, is that acceptable?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take a question from the webinar. Can a traceability code be a unique invoice or sales item number that could be linked to plant batches with internal systems to allow full traceability? Goodness, that's a systems question, isn't it? The answer is yes, it can. As long as it's unique to that particular plant batch, you can use whatever code or reference that you like. Okay, should take another. She's going to the nearest one.
Hi there.
Hi.
What happened? You said that obviously landscapers have got to register for plant health, but what happens if it's kind of like a developer or a builder? Do they have to register for plant health as well?
No, because they won't be defined as professional operators.
Okay.
Their core business is not horticultural.
Okay.
So no, they don't have to register. But landscapers and professional gardeners, yes. Okay. Take a question from the webinar. If we receive weekly batches from the same supplier, do we issue the same plant passport per variety for the duration of the season? So I don't know what their final customer is. So it's not clear whether that particular plant is prepared for the end user. But if it's prepared for the end user, yes, you can issue the same plant passport. So it's a label. The traceability is within your own system, so you know that they're different batches. So that's a system recording of the traceability. Does that make sense? Did I garble that? So if they're getting different batches from the same supplier, the plant passports will be the same, because you don't. If it's preparing for the end user and you're not further preparing it, then you don't need to issue a traceability code as it goes on. They would do if you were the supplier of that product, yes, absolutely.
You have to issue batch code, so it then has to be stuck on the individual item as well.
If on a plant passport, yes, because it will be on the passport. If you need to issue a traceability code.
Sales order number, sales order number.
So let's be clear, you only need a traceability code if the plant that you're selling or the product that you're selling goes through further preparation. So if you're a plug supplier, you must put a traceability code on it. If you're a liner supplier, you must put a traceability code on. And then if you're, yes, every unit. So not every single item, it's every unit. So it's up to the plug supplier what they define as their trade unit, for example. I'm looking at the plug supplier in the room. Okay, let's remember that we've actually got other people listening on the webinar, so if you need to speak, you need the microphone. Sorry. Another question from the room.
Again, it's coming back to this different interpretations. I work for a plug supplier. Plants are coming from the Netherlands, and I've gone back 3-4 times after reading your information on the sale unit, and I'm being told that we have to provide the information, or we can provide the information on the delivery notes, and nothing has to be attached to the pallet, plug tray, etc.
Mm-hmm. I refer back to the gentleman's question there that it's difficult for the UK growers because they will have to passport those items on. So it's the UK's interpretation is that they will need to actually passport every one of those items anyway. So yes.
Because it's the same subject, we import a great many plants from Europe, and we're told that the NACT authorities have said that their regulations, the suppliers can put all that information on the delivery note, not on the tray label, and therefore every tray coming into the UK will need to be relabeled at source, and that's probably a situation that's not possible. So it seems that the UK interpretation is very different to the Dutch interpretation of the same rule.
Yes.
Which I think is our headache as an industry.
Sorry, can I just say, but the Dutch have got it wrong. And if you're getting all that, then please can we have details of it?
Yes.
Because the regulation is quite specific. Plant passports shall be attached by the professional operators concerned to the trade unit of the plant products or other objects before they are moved within the Union territory.
So attaching it to a consignment note, if you've got different varieties in that consignment, is not applying the regulation. Can I take a question from the webinar?
It's on the same point.
Okay.
So can the HTA try and encourage DEFRA to take the same stance as Holland, because that would make our life an awful lot easier?
I think I'd like to encourage Holland to take the same stance as the UK.
No, but it would be easier to do it on the delivery note than it is to do, especially batch numbers, than it is to do it on individual plants.
You are not going to change that's changing the legislation. You can't change the legislation, it's set in law. You can change someone's interpretation of it.
So
and if the Dutch are not applying the legislation correctly, then unfortunately it is the Dutch authorities that actually need to change. So we can't change that legislation. I think we probably need to take this question further. That I am discussing it with DEFRA. I've said to you guys that we haven't got any answers of anything that I've put in over the last 2 weeks. It's one of the things they've been considering. Their statement to me was, you are well within your rights to talk to your suppliers, to say you're not compliant with the legislation. Could you please change the way you do things? So what we don't want to do is have UK growers at a disadvantage because they've got to then re-passport everything. So I'm not particularly thinking about plug trays coming in and growers actually potting them on, because you will have to, if you pot them on, you have to passport them yourself. I'm thinking about traded plants coming in from the Netherlands, for example, that have a plant that have not got a plant passport attached to them. And if you sell them within the UK, you will then have to produce your own passports. Okay. I'll take a question from the webinar. If we are selling finished to an online consumer, we have to plant passport, but don't need traceability? Question mark. That is not true. You will need to demonstrate full traceability. In fact, the attachment of the plant passport is a physical manifestation of the traceability. The traceability requirement is still in the background. So if you're an online seller and you've got to passport to the end consumer, to the end user, you will still have to maintain traceability within your systems. That should be achieved by knowing what plants you've sold to which consumer within your own company systems, but you do need to have traceability. Question from the floor?
Trade unit question. If I'm buying 10 trolleys, say, of the same commodity from my supplier, should I expect to find a plant passport on each of the 10 trolleys?
Yes, you should.
And if I'm breaking them down and sending out 5 to one customer, I attach 5 or a label to each of those trolleys as well?
Yes.
Thank you.
Question from the webinar. Does the traceability code need to be on the passport if the plant is being supplied to a landscaper? So again, it's the same question. You don't need a traceability code if the plant is prepared for the end user. So if it's a finished plant, even if you're one part of a supply chain, if you've got a finished plant and there's 3 other businesses within that supply chain, you do not need a traceability code, but you need to pass the plant passport information on down that chain and ensure that each one has a passport attached to it as it goes down the chain. So yeah.
You've just answered one part of the question actually, but I think there was an exemption to the fact that we wouldn't require a traceability code, so they could create a list that were exempt from that exemption, if that makes sense. Does that list already exist? I think you mentioned a high-risk list earlier.
So the high-risk host list does exist. That legislation came out this year, I believe. I think there's 20 species on that. Everything else, I think, is still in discussion, basically.
Okay, but that list is the ones that will require the traceability code.
I need to double check the legislation on that, actually, on the high-risk host. Is there a requirement for traceability codes on high-risk hosts? I don't think there is.
We'd need to check. I don't believe there is either. What the high-risk host list is more about is quicker action and quicker destruction notices.
Yes. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Over to the webinar. If I'm selling a potted tree to another nursery for them to sell, it will not go through further preparation, so therefore does not need a traceability code. But if I'm selling a bare root tree that they will pot or grow on, I would need to provide a traceability code. Yes, the answer is yes, you will. Question from the floor?
Sally, hi. Can I just jump in with a HTA hat on and ask a question?
Please do, Boyd.
Good afternoon. I'm HTA president at the moment. They said it'd be an easy gig, and then this came along, plus everything else. I sat in this morning with the retailers. I'm sat in this afternoon with the growers, and I sense a different mood and a potential issue. So I just want to throw it in the room and then probably leave, as I'm a retailer. The retailers this morning, I think the conclusion, and this was from Kingfisher and Dobbies and other people in the room, was everything will have to be plant passported at the pot as a plant. That will end a lot of the issues. I'm sensing a mood in here from the growers that we're looking for how's the least amount of plant passporting we need to do. And I just thought I'd better put that out from this morning's meeting, because as an industry, we've got to sort this one way or another. And I think putting a plant passport on I'm not talking about the plug tray that's going to be broken down and planted on, but I'm talking about the product as it heads to the final consumer as part of life. Seems to be that the mood this morning was it'll just have to have a passport on the pot. Well, this is why I said I'll say what I'm saying and then leave the room. Wish I was on the webinar end now because I wouldn't get a shot at. But it is the challenge the industry faces. And I think one of the things that you've said about, Sally, which I will like to suggest we could go back to DEFRA on, is yes, in the UK we're going to be very British and try to do the right thing, or not. Maybe we have a revolution and say stick it to a lot of you.
Please don't say that.
It's not recorded, is it? But the opportunity, particularly on that plug tray issue, is to actually get DEFRA to see some sense and say there will be no penalty. Because the legislation's there, but it's in their power to put a penalty or not. And they could say, well, in the UK, a plug tray does not have to have a label on it, maybe, and there will be no penalties if that goes through, because we understand it will go on to a further stage and will become plant passported as it travels its journey, maybe. And that's the thing which the HCA, I'm sure you're having all these conversations about ways round to generate an easier option. But I think we do need to pull the retailers and the growers together and bash all the heads and agree that the cost has got to be borne by the end consumer, because it's got to be passed on, hasn't it? You cannot do this without passing that price on. I'll also stick my head out and say that's... Well, exactly, but it has to be a united decision, doesn't it, to achieve that. The Dutch, I mean, I've been across to the garden centre today, and a lot of the foreign stock already has the passport stuff on there. So, the end unit is already labelled.
Like you saw from the photographs
exactly.
in the presentation.
Went up to the
garden centre last week.
A load of it.
Yeah.
There is a needing to come together. I'm shutting up now. I'm leaving.
Thank you, Boyd. So just...
Thanks. We supply quite a few retailers, and we supply some into DCs. Now, obviously, they will come to us expecting us to know absolute chapter and verse about this, will retailers. when they get goods into their DC to move to their stores, because it's going to end users, will they fall under the regulations of the 10 miles or not?
No, because their products will already be plant passported, so it's just making sure they have traceability within their businesses.
Yeah.
They won't be needing to plant passport again.
Yep, but if they break it down, so if we give them a full pallet and then break it down...
That's the conversation they need to have with you.
Yeah.
That's where it comes to each individual unit again. Yes, exactly. Yes. I'll take a question from the webinar. That's a long question. How far down the plant nomenclature does a trade unit apply? There are several mentions of species, but what is that term referring to? I'm not entirely sure I understand that question. The basket example shown in the presentation just listed the genus. So I think this is around whether it goes to genus or in species on the passport. So if you've got genus and species available to you, you should use genus and species. It's like I said, there are certain pests and diseases that attack certain different species within one genus. So it's quite important that we know what genus and species are moving within trade, which is why DEFRA have asked, could we please put genus and species on things? If you've got a problem, for example, my mind's gone blank on a certain example. Prunus, for example. Some Prunus are susceptible to Xylella. Some aren't, so it's really important that you have specific Prunus species on your passports, and then it makes it easy to trace back through trade. Hopefully that answers that question. You've got a question, okay?
Further clarification on the traceability code on the plant passport itself. So selling on to the final destination where there's going to be no further preparation, no need for a traceability code on the plant passport itself, so long as the traceability is within our internal systems.
Yes.
Does that mean then, I think it was touched on before, that we can use the same plant passport across multiple different batches? So say, for example, Viola cornuta, we can use the same plant passport on that for one batch and then use it on multiple different batches of different colours, etc.?
Yes, definitely. The label companies, for example, are making provision that you can put a plant passport onto a care card, because a care card goes in a plant that's basically prepared for the end user, or it's in its final prep stage. So yes, you can pre-print your plant passports if no traceability code is required.
Okay, fabulous.
Okay. Another question from the webinar. How would a garden centre record the plant passports they have received? It is on a label attached to the pot. So they need to keep every label. So this is where you need to have a conversation with your customers about how you're actually going to pass that information on. So I think I mentioned in the presentation, it's a good conversation to have about, can you provide it to them as a copy on a dispatch note? Could you send it on their invoice? Can you send it to them via email, maybe as a spreadsheet? As long as you've got the data that's included on that passport, you would be helping your customer to provide them with that. I think a lot of businesses are actually printing them on dispatch notes. It doesn't have to be a facsimile, it just has to have the data that's on the physically attached plant passport. Question from the floor. This gentleman here.
I'm a retailer as well as a grower, and we grow from seed, from bare root, from liners, from plugs. And it looks like the easy way is to over-engineer and label everything, which is pretty difficult because we're only a small team, but I don't see any other way because we get landscapers in. And if the kids on the weekend are not fully aware or up to date and didn't know them as a landscaper and send stuff out and haven't recorded it, we're going to get into trouble.
That's the $1 million question, will you get into trouble? If you don't know that person is a landscaper?
Yeah, but I might, they might not, but the company knows that they're a landscaper.
Okay. It is the onus is on the other professional operator to make themselves known to you. So you're not legally obliged to go out and find out if everybody buying from you in your retail environment is a professional operator. So therefore the onus is on them to do that. But I'm not sure where the legality lies if you personally know, but the person on your till doesn't. If they haven't got an account, for example, then the person on the till won't know that they're a landscaper. But if you're on the till and you know they are, the legal onus then becomes on you because you have that knowledge.
And at that point, am I going to have to stop the sale and make sure that everything is as it should be and keep the landscaper waiting because they don't want to wait? Mm-hmm. So we still go back to making sure that every single plant is properly labelled. And to that end, I'm going to need to find a supplier who does a really good printer that can print all this all out for us because, that's a whole new ball game for us.
So the technical answer to that is yes, you're right. In the absence of, if you've got knowledge, you need to comply with the regulation. I think in this instance that this grace period for non-compliance would certainly help you with that. At the moment, you're legally obliged to passport onto a professional operator.
Can you recommend a label supplier?
There's several very good label suppliers and label printers out there. I personally can't recommend one, but I'm sure there's someone in the room that can help you with that. We'll take one from the webinar. Can we confirm that a passport issued by ourselves will be compliant when only contain details of the last country of origin rather than any previous countries the item may have been traded from? So legally, you don't have an obligation to know the full traceability of that item that you're trading in. You have to take on faith that the passport that you've received has a country of origin on it. And that is, as far as you're concerned, the country of origin. You don't have to trace that back. That's not your job, basically, to know exactly where that item has come from. So if there is an issue with that item, that's the Plant Health Authority's job to trace that back through. So hence why the traceability systems that we will have in place would be able to trace that problem right back through to the origin. Question from the floor? Gentleman at the back.
There's a piece in the legislation that says any passports issued before the 14th will remain valid for 3 years. Mm-hmm. Would you be able to explain a little bit about how that works? I'm assuming it's as long as the commodity doesn't change,
yes,
then
exactly.
It can stay with it.
Exactly. So if it's issued before the 14th and it doesn't have all of that data on, it still remains valid as long as that item is not then further changed.
Okay, and I've heard from some suppliers, they've interpreted it as long as the crop was harvested before the 14th, then that's the process. I'm assuming that's incorrect and that the passport needs to have been issued before the 14th.
The passport needs to have been issued before the 14th, yes. It's not about the timing of crops. Although if you do have product on the ground now that will then need to be passported after the 14th, and you don't know for necessarily the country of origin, for example, you're not obliged to put a country of origin on there. I think you could put GB, technically, if it's been in your care for a certain amount of time. So you're not obliged to know the traceability of that item. For example, if you have no records of where that was bought from, if it's pre the 14th. But post the 14th, you will still have to issue the passport yourself.
So anything that's supplied to us before the 14th with an old or current style passport, we would then issue a new passport after the 14th, but we would leave certain sections blank.
If you don't have that information, you don't have that information. Yeah, you can't. You're not obliged to go and find it out. Yes, exactly. Question from the webinar. If our grower grows a crop of the same species, different cultivars, what do they need to do when shipping to us 1 truckload of the crop? Wow, that's a big order. What do we need to do in preparing and shipping to the end user? So I'm not entirely sure what stage in the supply chain this question's come from. So basically, I think they're saying if they receive a truckload of one crop, but different cultivars, and it's passported as one, with one passport, what do they need to do in preparing and then shipping to the end user? So I'm not sure whether they're shipping to the end user online or whether they're then going to a retailer. So obviously if they're going to a retailer, they will then need to passport those items themselves. If they're shipping to the end user, then they will, if they're actually dispatching out in the post via online sales, then they will have to passport each of those individual items themselves. So I think that's right. Oh yes, it's a nursery. So yeah. Okay. Question from the floor? Hi.
So I'm assuming we will have to put traceability on the labels the whole way through because we'll have broken. Yeah, but we'll have broken down some of the things. What I'm actually going to ask is, where does our responsibility stop? I mean, like, once we supply it to the landscaper and we've done everything correctly, is that it? We can just say, or do we need our landscapers? We need to inform our landscapers that they need to be keeping records for however many years, or
so it's a nice thing to do, to explain what that is that you're giving to them. But you're under no legal obligation to make sure that they're doing the right thing. It's your obligation to make sure you pass that information on. Again, I reiterate, if it's prepared for that landscaper to use as a final plant, you don't need the traceability code on it, okay?
Even if we split up a batch of stuff, numbers that come in.
Yeah, you need to re-passport, but you don't need a traceability code. But you still need to have traceability within your system. Okay, all right. Just take a question from the webinar. How do you register to issue a plant passport? That's a nice, simple question. You contact your plant health inspector. You can find that out on the internet, on AFA's pages. There's a phone number you can ring to find out who your plant health inspector is, and there's also an email address. And actually, at the end of the presentation, there is all the contact details for the plant health authorities, and you can do that through there. I like that question. Yeah, lady at the back.
Hi, my question's about the design of the label or the plant passport. So you talked about the ABCD references. Do they need to be printed on the label?
Yes, they do. So it's clear what data on that label is clear. So you need to print A and then the data B data. Okay.
Sorry, just in conjunction with that, the logo, so the EU flag, I saw on one of your examples it was in reverse. So you've got the white background with the black stars. Can we do it that way?
Yep, absolutely.
And then the third question is, we have a product that has 7 items in. So the tray that we are putting them in, there's not enough room to put
teeny tiny label.
Yeah. Is it possible to only put the genus of the 7 items on? Okay.
Yes, that's where it's applicable to put genus, even though you've got species available.
Yeah,
if it makes it illegible, then it's pointless. So yes, genus in that respect.
Thank you.
And if you don't use C, so you have to print it on the label.
You must print the letter C to indicate there is no C. How long do items imported from the EU be in the UK before the country of origin becomes GB? There is no set time. It's again this country of origin question. There are some guidelines out there for the AFA inspectors. There's been all sorts of data flying around in different meetings I've been at. It's a month for lavenders. It's 2 weeks for plugs. There is no set time. So unfortunately, I can't answer that until I get a proper definition.
As far as you're concerned, that's okay for now?
Okay for now, unless you know that it's actually originated from somewhere else and you're just trading it through. So if you're trading it through and you know that it's NL and you're just literally just manoeuvring it around, dispatching it on. Yeah, yeah. If it grows on your nursery for a certain amount of time, if you put it on, you can put GB on it. But we still are waiting for that absolute definition. Is that a question from the floor? Gentleman at the front. Gentleman at the down.
Goes back to a meeting I had with DEFRA about 8 months ago. They were on about when it was coming in and labels. What they told us that the label must be visible all the way through the transport network. Is that still true?
It does need to be visible, yes.
Right. So that's going on. If we're selling a rack of seeds that's got 275 varieties on, a different species, how do we then have to put 275 labels on a box?
Sorry, I'm not with your question. You said it needed to be visible.
Right, because you can't go and mix up your varieties. You need different labels.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're then selling a rack of seeds that's got 275 different varieties on, how do we get over that? Because you've got it in and out of box.
So is it not on the? Well, seeds don't need to be plant passported apart from a few varieties. Would it not be on the packet?
Yeah, but the packet's inside the box.
Okay, but that's still visible. So a plant health
on the transport box.
So if a plant health inspector sees it, it's allowable that they may have to open something. It's if they destroy something to see it.
Right.
Okay.
So they can get it out of box, but they can at least get to the packet.
Absolutely, because those items are plant passported.
Told originally, like going, what do we have to do here?
Yeah. Okay. Obviously, if you've got everything of the same thing in the box, you could just stick it on the box.
Fantastic.
And also, if you've got, for example, a tray or say a crate, and it's got one of those slot labels in, the plant passport can actually be on the back of that slot label. The inspector just has to lift it to view it and put it back in. So it doesn't actually have to be in line of sight. It can be as long as it's visible without destruction.
Right, that's totally different to what we were told originally.
Okay, so make it easier.
It makes it fantastically easier.
Good. Hooray. Question from the webinar. As a grower, we sell plants in differing pot sizes through the season, e.g. first in 1 litre, then the same batch potted into 2 litre. Do the plants need a new passport as now in a different pot size? Well, yes, they would do anyway because they're in different trade units. If you're trading them throughout the year at different times to different people, you'd have to plant passport those pots either individually, or if you're sending a 1 litre out in a trade unit of 8, you can passport that trade unit of 8. But if they're then in 2 litres in 2 weeks' time, then you need to passport those. So the answer is yes.
I think they might grow and sell in the same garden centre.
Oh, if it's in a garden centre, then they won't need to passport them. Okay. We'll come to that later when I answer. Actually, all of these questions that we're getting on the webinar, we're going to attempt to answer them by text and then put the answers and the questions out as a Q&A document. So if something like that needs checking, hopefully by the time I come to answer it, we can have that actually written down with advice. The presentation will also be available for downloading probably tomorrow. We'll send out a block email to everybody that's attended and also who's on the webinar to say that actually it's available now and you can download it. And you can also download any of the 3. So from all 3 sessions, if you're a HTA member, you can do that. Will we do that via the website? We'll do that via the website. Q&A probably won't be ready till next week because I need a bit of time to type it all up. We've got a question from the floor.
Hi. Do plants destined for delivery outside the EU need to be plant passported or just normal phytosanitary requirements?
So there's no plant passporting system outside of the EU. This is an EU system. Everything that goes outside of the EU must have a phytosanitary certificate, which has to be issued by AFA or the Plant Health Authority. Okay, I'll take a question from the webinar. What time have we got? What is the difference between a landscaper planting a plant in a housing scheme to a private customer planting in their garden? Why does one need a passport and one doesn't? So the landscaper is a professional operator. So they come under the legislation. They have to fulfil certain criteria. The landscaper needs to pass that passporting information on to the developer as well, because they're a company. But a private customer planting in their own garden, that's a consumer. The regulation doesn't cover them. Question from the floor? Pick one, Jazz.
I'm still having a problem with the question you had earlier about the traceability from the actual labels. So if the labels have gone off to a landscaper and he just throws them all away, are we really saying that we've got to have the same information on the delivery notes, and we've also got to have the same information on our incoming delivery notes from other people? Because I think I asked you this question last week about
Was it difficult then? Did I not give you an answer?
Well, no, I'm just concerned about all the labels that come in attached to plants that are then being taken off when they're repassported. We're not being expected to keep all those labels, are we?
If you have no method of keeping the information, then yes.
Yes.
If you've not established a line of traceability or information receipt with your supplier, then yes, if that's the only way of recording it, you can take photographs of them. Yeah. But actually, I would establish a line with your supplier where the data comes into you in a different manner that's easier to keep. Dispatch notes or emails or whichever, on an invoice, whichever is easier for you to keep. You're the customer after all.
Yeah.
So I would establish
that line. So we really need to be doing the same for our landscapers, is making sure that our paperwork that they might keep has got the information on, as well as the label, which they're going to throw away.
Yes, so for example, you probably issue them with a bill of sale or a note to take away with them that's what they've got. So if you can replicate the information that is on the passport, the data, you don't have to replicate the passport, but the data within it, then that's their method of keeping records.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, another question from the webinar. Oh. I wish to conceal the origin of English tree growers. I don't understand that. Otherwise, my clients might buy direct. Oh, I see. I remove suppliers' labels from trees as soon as they arrive. Is there more to that question? No. That's it. Oh, okay. That's not really a question. Yeah. They just got to re-passport it. So actually, there is a question in that. If you receive products from suppliers that you trade on, and you don't want your customers to know where you're receiving that material on, and you will obviously then have to re-passport it yourself if you don't want to pass that information on. So you can either peel the actual passport off of the item. You can stick your passport over the top of it, or you can literally put a marker pen through it. But you have to negate that passport because that's no longer a valid passport if you've applied your new passport yourself. But you don't have to. But you don't have to. No, not at all. You can just use that passport to pass that information on. It's all about recording it. Question from webinar. I'll have one from the floor in a second. Do we have any obligation to ask a nursery customer if they are buying from us to pot on or to supply on with no for further preparation? So I'm assuming they're selling to professional operators. The obligation is not really on you to find out what they're going to do with that plant. You'd be passing that information on anyway. I think maybe this is about issuing a traceability code, I would imagine. It's not your obligation to find out what they're going to do, but if there's a chance that that plant or that product might go through further preparation, it is part of the requirement. And if you know that that's going to happen, then you do have to fulfil the legal obligation on that. Question from the floor?
Hi, Sally.
Hi.
You've mentioned that it is expected from a plant health person to turn a label over to have a look at the plant passport. However, if we were to print information on a pot itself and then put it inside a ceramic. Can we expect them to pull a plant out of the ceramic?
That's absolutely fine. Yeah, if it's sleeved or if it's in a ceramic or it's in a cover, as long as they can easily access the information, they would expect to see it on the pot or maybe a care card. They wouldn't expect to see it on a ceramic.
Okay, thank you.
Question from the webinar. We are a bedding plant producer and would like further information on how to create a batch size. Could this be at the point of seed sowing, multiple plug trays or finished trade unit? That really is a question for the nursery themselves to work out what their batch sizes are. It's entirely unique to your own business and it's entirely unique to that particular batch of plants. It's how you decide to actually create a batch code. So I can't answer that specifically. Question from the floor?
Can I just confirm that if I'm selling a finished plant to a landscaper or a garden centre, I don't need batch information or country of origin on that label?
You'll need country of origin, but you don't need batch information.
But you said just earlier that we could remove country of origin from supply and then re-passport with our label.
I think if you know the country of origin, then you're obliged to put the country of origin on the passport. It's a legal document. It's a document of conformity.
I would be re-passporting that product.
Okay, even if you're trading it?
I would trade it in and re-passport it out.
Right. That might be a technical one. David, do you have a stance on that one?
My personal view would be if it came in with a plant passport that had got a country of origin on it, you would need to transfer that country of origin onto your re-passporting.
Yes, I would say you need to carry on that country of origin because it's not GB.
It would only be because it would still be the same country of origin. What you wouldn't be showing though would be the supplier that you got it from.
No, because you change it to your own passport identification number with GB in front of it.
Yeah, I took it from the question from the webinar where he was wanting to hide the country of origin to try stop people bringing trees in direct.
Right, okay. So if you're trading and you're re-passporting yourself, you still have to have the proper country of origin on, unless it's gone through this procedure that we don't know much about what is the definition of country of origin. So I think a certain amount of time being in your care, for example, you could technically rebadge it as GB country of origin, but if you are literally trading it through, you must keep that country of origin at section D, while section B would start with a GB because that's your plant passport authorization number because you've reissued the passport. Correct? Correct. Yes, it's back. Hang on.
Sorry.
Thanks, Boyd.
Not querying you because you're brilliant.
Thanks.
I'm following what's going on here. If the whole point is traceability, the fact that this tree has come from abroad into the UK, is relabeled and goes on to a retailer, it's still fully traceable.
Correct.
So I can see why UK nurseries want to do all this. We can all see the point of that. As long as they can trace back when they get asked, where did the tree come from? Why have they got to declare that it came from Billy Baggins in Holland and not from Freddie Whatnots in Huddersfield? Trying to be neutral there. Because that's what we want to achieve there, isn't it? As a trader of plants, we all want to be seen to be growing and selling British or
keep
selling
your
British.
Own provenance.
The traceability point on your very first slide, that's still maintained even if it's been re-passported with a country of origin GB because it's now coming from a GB grower. Just stirring it on behalf of the growers here. Come on, growers, stand up for ourselves. Oh, no, I'm a retailer. Shut up.
Hold on. I wouldn't encourage that practice, but I can understand why you would want to do that. I think if we apply the letter of the law, then the answer is you carry on the country of origin. It's up to you whether you want to bend those rules. But
question on the webinar where you said cross it out, cover it up and send your own.
Correct, but that is if you're re-passporting it, okay? So, Yeah, you're re-passporting, but you must keep the country of origin as where the origin is from. That's because it's being disingenuous, really, to claim it as GB. Oh, I apologise if I wasn't clear now. So yes, clarity on length of time is quite important. It is a grey area.
If we're buying new plants in, and we're buying one for 2 days or maybe weeks, where do you draw that line?
We don't know yet. We don't know yet. No. Okay, well, we're awaiting that definition, aren't we? So currently we have to go with the best information we have, which is your gut instinct. Sorry?
I have that definition from Plant Health if it's any use to you.
Sorry, could you...
I have that definition sent to me by Plant Health if it's any use to you.
It is, absolutely. The red words say, this is our definition. It is not exclusive, but gives you a good idea. Growing on, nurseries must consider their plants to have grown on if they have been potted, repotted, grafted or rooted, or in active growth under protection for at least 2 weeks, or in active growth outside for at least 4 weeks. So
that question about country of origin.
That's the country of origin, and that's the AFA inspector's operational procedures. Excellent. Thank you. Yes, please. So we can send that out, which is great. We can send out the definition of country of origin, which has come from the AFA inspector's procedural procedural manual. That's the word I'm looking for. Thank you, the floor. So are we on the floor or are we on the webinar at the moment? We're on the webinar, thank you. If I buy in a product with its own traceability code, does that code become my traceability code? It absolutely does not become your traceability code. That's the traceability code of the person that's actually passed it on to you. And if you have a requirement to put a traceability code on, that means that that plant is going through even further preparation down the supply chain. So then you must apply your own traceability code to that item. So you'll be re-passporting it and putting a traceability code on it. But that's if it's a second stage of preparation. So if this person on this question is actually preparing it for final use, then no traceability code required. Okay, question from the floor?
It's about the traceability of finished products again, finished plants. You mentioned earlier, obviously we know that if it's finished plant going into retail, we don't need traceability.
Yes.
But you also mentioned that that might change in the future.
That may well change in the future.
How likely is that? When? Any ideas? Crystal ball?
Yeah, looking into my crystal ball.
For me, I'm going to go through the process, IT getting it done.
Of course.
Is it worth doing it? It's not so difficult for me to do it all at the same time in my situation.
Yes.
Would it be worth doing?
I think at this moment in time, and I do have an answer there from our legal expert, at this moment in time, I'd say it's not even in the pipeline, but the provision is in the legislation, so it is how long is a piece of string.
The provision in the legislation is that the Commission will bring forward a report not later than the 14th of December 2021 on extending plant passport system to all movement of plants to include a clear cost-benefit analysis for operators and accompanied, if appropriate, by a legislative proposal. So depending on what happens with Brexit, etc., whether they'll keep that timetable, they haven't kept the timetables on anything else. So, but he's there for 2021.
So this is a good point. This is where we, as an industry, can influence what happens if we have exited the EU and that proposal comes through and the UK maybe wants to adopt that proposal, then that's where we can influence how DEFRA approach that legislation. So I think that's 2 years away. So I think applying your system would be okay to do so. But again, it's a risk that you take. Okay, we'll have a question from the webinar. Does the plant passport info on paperwork for filing purposes have to appear in the same box layout? No, I think we have said this before. It's not a facsimile of the passport for record keeping purposes. It is just keeping the data at A, B, C and D. Question from the floor? Someone that hasn't... Oh.
Sorry. Just a little bit about what Boy said as well, that I appreciate you're a retailer. And what most people here, and this is yourselves included, appear now to be complying with the legislation by putting it onto a trading unit. Now, what I see there's going to be a problem coming is not now, because we're complying, is in 6 to 10 months when they turn up at a garden centre and say, right, show me your paperwork here, and if we're going to put it on back of a seed and people are going to rot it on plants, they're going to sold it on, nobody's going to end up keeping records in a garden centre. So I feel, from our point of view, we need to do something electronically as well to supplement this.
I think that's absolutely right. Yes, I think everybody should have in their...
My mindset's now coming out, so that's that.
Mm-hmm. Everybody should have provision for keeping traceability in an electronic format. And I said at the beginning about the implementing legislation that's proposed about electronic passporting, and that's definitely something that I think the trade as a whole would benefit from, but that's something that's further down the line. But having it in mind now is a really good idea. All we're doing is complying at the moment. Exactly.
That's not right, always paperwork, that's wrong, as well.
Yes. Okay, question at the back.
Yeah, just one on the traceability again is I likewise went to the garden centre just over the road there, and there was some Hamamelis there, and obviously there was nothing in the C box because a grower sent it to the retailer, so you don't have to fill in the traceability box. And I just can't get my mind how, if there was an issue with that plant, which is what, or that group of plants, is how it can be, if you don't have the traceability there, and several batches may have been delivered or whatever, how it can be identified where it eventually came from, because it seems as though the traceability is lost almost at the point where it finally matters.
So, for example, are we saying if a garden centre has several different batches of the same thing without a traceability code on, they should know who their supplier is and be able to provide that information to a plant health inspector?
Yeah, but if it's on the, if they haven't got a traceability code on that plant, how do you what's the identification process in there to link it to one of 2 or 3 invoices that may have, I just...
Where record keeping comes in. This is where systems need to be in place about keeping those records and making sure you know what batches have come in when and when they've gone on sale and where they might be. If an inspector comes in and finds a problem, then you should really be able to tell that inspector where that item came from, and then that could then go back to your supplier and track it back through the line. So I understand about if it hasn't got a traceability code on it, then how do you know which batch it came from, and then how does the grower then know which batch that came from? Absolutely. Sorry. There may well be other identifying marks on that plant, on labels possibly at the retailer, to actually fulfil that requirement. But it is about systems and about getting the right information into that system. Sorry, Max, you had a comment?
Yeah, we supply retailers, so what we normally use is a use by or a sell by date, which refers back to essentially a batch number.
Yeah. So even though you don't need to put the traceability code on your passport, it's on that item anyway, so the retailer would be able to provide you with that. And also a plant health inspector, of course, could go back. Okay. So I could take this from the webinar?
It's not a question, it's an answer from my plant health inspector.
Okay.
My plant health inspector actually says the more traceability you've got, the better, because if you find that they do have a problem, if you can just narrow it down to one batch, there'll be instruction order that one batch.
Absolutely.
So it's more about, so it's the benefit to the growers to make sure you keep records.
Absolutely. Yes. So the smaller the batch, really, the better the outcome for you as a grower if there is an issue, because it will come down to destruction. So a question from the webinar. We receive grower trays from Holland. They are laid down for a week, repackaged as a smaller unit and sold to the retailers. Is the country of origin Netherlands? So I think from that definition that we've just had, yes, the country of origin is the Netherlands, because they've only been laid down for a week, and I think the definition was 2 weeks if in a protected environment. So yes, country of origin must be kept as NL. Question from the floor? Only one. Have I exhausted you with your questions?
In one of your examples of a passport, I think it was the Wisteria one,
yes.
In section B where it has the professional operator identification code, it was GBEW, and some others were just GB. Obviously we have the 3 different authorities. Do we need to put the EW or S or NI, is it?
Yes, you do. So in Scotland it's GB-S, and in Northern Ireland it's GB-NI, and so on.
So any with just simply GB would be
England. There's only one left. Must be England.
But do we have to put the EW?
Yes.
So simply GB doesn't comply?
No, you're right there. I think we need to get that. I need to get that put in the guidelines.
Just GB.
Yes, there were. I mean, GB would technically be compliant at this moment in time, but we'll actually put that out as some guidance. That's a good point. Thank you.
So what we've been told in the past is it's GBEW if you're in England and Wales, because your Plant Health Authority that issues you your number is AFA, and it's GBS because Scotland issue your number if you're in Scotland, and NI if you're in Northern Ireland, because Northern Ireland authorities issue your number. So that's the rationale for it.
I was told by the Scottish Government that they will want GBS on there, so I guess that follows through then. So I've got a question from the webinar. Am I correct in saying that as a company, the actual plant passport number is the same for every plant we send out? It's the variety name that changes. So, of course, your authorised issuer's number is what appears at B, and I think that's what people are assuming is the passport number. That's not the passport number. That's your authorised issuer's number. So that's in conjunction with the last question that we had about putting GB-S and then your authorised issuer's number. So of course that would be the same on every passport that you issue. Question from the floor? Oh, I hadn't exhausted you.
As a retailer, what about all our existing stock? We're going to have to backtrack through that and label it.
So I think we had a similar question earlier from the gentleman sat there. So your stock that you currently have, you will have to passport after the 14th if it leaves your premises. And you're under no obligation to work out where the traceability is of that, because that wasn't part of the legislation at that time when you received that stock. But after the 14th, yes, you will need to passport it if applicable.
Or do we just take the whole lot off sale and say we haven't got any plants until we... It's going to take us a long time.
Seems an easier thing.
We're right in the middle of Christmas trees, all that sort of thing. We've still got plant stock. I've only got 3, including myself, full-timers and some part-timers. Physically, it's impossible to go and label everything. One, I don't have a label machine. Then we've got to get it in, set it up, train people to go off and label 5,000 plants.
So this is where this period of no penalties would help you very much. It shows that you're intending to comply with it, but you'll have 12 months to do that. And don't forget, you don't need to passport until it leaves your premises. You don't have to go around now and put a plant passport and everything. It's only when it actually leaves your premises and it goes to a professional operator that you will need to actually passport it. Okay. I know we've discussed that earlier about whether it's necessary to do that or not.
The landscaper could come in on the 15th to buy a load of stuff and it's not being plant passported.
To be honest, I think DEFRA and AFA will take a very practical view of that. I don't think you're about to be thrown into jail for not passporting something on the 15th, but you need to be showing that you are planning it and you want to do it and you've got an intent to do it. I think that's as good as it's going to get. If you've got time and cost constraints and labour constraints, then you only have to work. You can work with what you've got, and your AFA inspector will help you, will support you through that process, and maybe suggest and help you through how you might achieve it. Just a question from the webinar. A pallet of imported transplant hedging, one genus to one pallet, would have one PP attached. The pallet is split between many orders to landscapers. Do we use a copy of the original PP, or do we create our own PP for all our orders? That's where you will have to create your own. You will have to issue your own plant passport for every order. You can't just copy the passport, because the passport applies to that whole trade unit, and you're breaking those trade units up. And so you'll need to passport each batch that you send out, because they'll be dispatched at different times as well. On the floor?
Sally, it's a bit more of an open question to the HTA, but if you look at the bigger picture on importing and exporting plants, and we're only a small part of DEFRA's responsibilities, as the HTA questioned AFA and DEFRA on whether they have the personnel and the systems, because I believe Peach is pretty vulnerable at best. Can they actually, we talk about legislation and the Brits will comply to it, but are we not just heading for a big fall? Because we have a really good system at the moment where plant passports are on the delivery notes, we have traceability, and now we're being asked to sort of move to a more finite piece of information. I just don't see where the resource is to make all of this work.
So I do know that AFA at the moment have recruited at least 80 extra inspectors. So that's quite a significant number. They were recruited originally in case of a no-deal Brexit, but if we exit or don't exit with a deal or whatever, the prospect of no deal is getting further and further away. They've got to do something. So I think that we will get further policing of this, or further help from and support from AFA inspectors to actually help us through this. But it's a very valid question, and one that we'll take back to DEFRA. Thanks, Colin.
Phytos, because there are so many more cases where phytos will be needed.
Yes.
Inspections will need to be carried out, and most of these horticultural businesses work on 7 days a week. So weekend work is very busy, and that's not usually a time when you can get your local inspector to come in.
Yes, so we're talking about in the event of a no-deal Brexit, the issuance of phytosanitary certificates for export out of the UK and into the Republic of Ireland. You can actually, if you've imported it on a phyto, say from the Netherlands, you can actually re-export that material to the Republic of Ireland on that phytosanitary certificate, but you will need to get it signed off by your AFA inspector. So it's still sort of in the same difficulty, but it doesn't mean to say that you have to wait days and weeks for that phyto to come through, because I believe they're all printed individually and then posted to you, which is very helpful. We have raised that issue with the EU exit team, and they're looking into it. So we will see what comes of that. I have lodged that issue with DEFRA to say you don't have the resource, and neither do the businesses that are re-exporting to the ROI have time to actually fulfil that phytosanitary requirements. I know there's other businesses in the room that have difficulties with phytosanitary certificates, all of which have been presented to DEFRA for further consideration. Noted, I think the word is. Question for the gentleman at the back.
Just a quick one on this sort of period of grace period that you mentioned with regards to penalties. So say if you're, for example, in a situation where our company is now, where we produce sort of many thousands of handmade Christmas wreaths a year. After the 14th, obviously, it's the first time hearing it today that anything that has been taken from a cutting taken from a tree over 3 meters will require a plant passport. If we don't have any means with the labour that's obviously already in place for this year's production to actually physically get plant passport labels on a wreath after the 14th this year, if we are showing willing for next year and, you know, coming up with ways on how to make that happen for 2020, does the period of grace on no penalties apply for that bracket of 10 days between the 14th and the 24th of December this year, where essentially we will not get penalised if no plant passports are on a wreath?
So if we get a formal statement from DEFRA saying that they agree with that grace period, yes, it would absolutely be applicable from the 14th of December this year. If I get that, when I get that through, I will make sure that everybody gets that news ASAP. In the meantime, and I think I said it to another gentleman, that actually your inspectors will take a practical view of that. Mm-hmm. They know that that is a difficult situation to be in. It's a high volume time of year. And I just think you need to show that you're aware of that, that you're unable to put that into place at this moment in time.
So aside from the confirmation from yourself, this is something that we can actually bring to our own inspector.
Absolutely.
And get their advice on it as well.
Yes, I think that's a really good idea.
Okay, thank you.
That's a really good idea. Hold on.
So technically, if you put something in before the 14th and it's got, can the retailer sell it after the 14th without a label?
If you put it in store?
Before the 14th.
Yeah, absolutely. It's already at that place. So if it's in store before the 14th and it's still on sale, it doesn't have to have the new plant passport put on it. One more question here.
A lot of us seem to have the same issues here, that the NAC is saying one thing, DEFRA is saying another.
Mm-hmm.
Has there ever been an instance before where there's been a big conflict between NAC and DEFRA, and if so, who wins? Because obviously, like, if I go back to Dutch, and you know what it's like dealing with Dutch, they're never wrong.
Couldn't possibly say.
Well, I'll say they're never wrong. I don't believe they are. But in real terms, they will not change. I know what they're like. They said, if the NAC says this, that's it. But, you know, if DEFRA is saying one thing, NAC saying other, has there ever been any instance where there's been a major conflict on policy or legislation, and if so, who's right?
Not that I've been party to. David, have you ever come across anything?
There's been specifics on, I can think of, on plant health over the years. Lirium coming in on cuttings. Our first outbreaks about processionary moth. And there, the Dutch were saying it wasn't a plant health issue, it was a human health issue, and therefore, I'm going back about 10 years here, therefore we shouldn't be able to take action on plant health grounds. We won that one.
So the answer is yes. I'll just take one more question from the floor if there's anybody's got one. Yep.
Just going on the transporting between sites in excess of 10 miles.
Yes.
So if we got product on a trolley, if it's mixed genus as, can that go on the same trolley?
Can go on the same trolley, whether it's on the same passport is another thing. It will, yes. It'll need to comply.
Yes. And that's right. And then that's grown on and then brought back for dispatch. Does that and then again need plant passport in back again?
Yes.
Brilliant.
Okay, right. Thank you very much to everybody. Just to reiterate, a copy of the presentation, questions will be available after the event. We'll let you know. And thank you very much for attending. I'm going to close the webinar now.
Just before you dash off,